Branded. Chapter 2. I waited for Oswald at my locker. He never showed, so I was almost late for the assembly. The auditorium was nearly full when I walked in. That was no problem for me, because the seat that I was heading for would be empty. I made my way to the front of the room in the very center. Julia was the only person sitting in the front row. Where was Oswald? I expected that he'd be there. Hardly anybody else ever willingly sat up front. It wasn't my idea or Oswald's. Julia said it was her responsibility as student president to be visible to all the students and staff. I slumped into the seat beside her. "Where's Oswald?" she asked. "I was going to ask you the same question. Maybe he lost track of time." "He'd lose track of his head if it wasn't loosely attached to his body," she said. "I just hope he gets here on time." "You don't think he wasn't suspended?" I said. "That's just crazy thinking." "So crazy that you thought of it too without me saying it," said Julia. "Mr. Roberts likes Oswald," I argued. "He'd suspend Gandhi, remember?" "Oswald better get here soon. The assembly is about to start." I looked at my watch. It was synced to school time, to the second. It was less than a minute to the start of the period, and that meant the assembly would start in 1 minute. Things always started on time since Mr. Roberts had become principal. "I don't know what's worse, missing the assembly or walking in late," Julia said. "You know how Roberts is about people being late." Julia said people and not students because Mr. Roberts was no easier on staff who arrived late. "From where we're sitting, it's not like Mr. Roberts won't notice Oswald isn't here either," I said, looking around. "Maybe he can sneak in and take a seat at the back." The crowd noise suddenly stopped. I looked up to see Mr. Roberts striding across the stage. Everybody knew to shut up when he appeared. On stage, already seated, were the 2 vice principals and the department heads. None of them were talking. They knew better too. Mr. Roberts could be tough, but he was fair about it. When somebody else was at the podium talking, he listened, hands folded on his lap, paying complete attention. "Good afternoon," Mr. Roberts said. "I'm so glad you all chose to join us this fine Friday afternoon." "Like we had a choice," Julia said under her breath. She always gave a running commentary, but never loud enough that Mr. Roberts would notice. "I want to start by offering congratulations to our girls' volleyball team, which won the city championship." The crowd cheered and clapped and whistled. The applause slowly faded away. "Now I'm going to announce another way that our school is going to lead the entire city. The school board has selected our school to pilot a new project." "My guess is guard dogs or bars on the windows," Julia whispered out of the side of her mouth. "This new change will help to improve security," Mr. Roberts continued. Maybe the guard dogs weren't so far off. "These changes will allow us to be more visible, not just at school, but also in the community." "My guess is fingerprints, mugshots, or tattoos," she muttered. I knew Mr. Roberts hated tattoos. This was strange since he had a tattoo on his arm. It was the Marine Corps emblem, an eagle sitting on top of the world. Once a Marine, always a Marine. "Rather than simply telling you about our new change, I want to show you." He gestured to the side, and Oswald walked onto the stage. He was wearing a jacket and a tie. I didn't even know Oswald owned a tie. "Introducing our new school uniforms," Mr. Roberts announced. There was a stunned silence reaction from the audience. It was as if no one could believe what they had just heard or seen. "He didn't just say uniforms, did he?" Julia asked loudly. In the silence of the auditorium, her words carried across the room. They triggered a response, and people started to talk and groan. There were even some boos. Mr. Roberts raised his hands in the air, and the noise lessened. But it didn't stop completely. "Your attention, please," he barked, and the room fell silent again. "Oswald has the honor of being the first student at our school to wear the new uniform." Oswald was obviously being punished in a very public way. He looked uncomfortable. Oswald liked being the center of attention, but this was too much attention in too central a spot. "It is a simple uniform," said Mr. Roberts. "Black pants, white shirt, blazer, and tie. The green sweater Oswald is wearing is optional. The sweater and the blazer feature our school crest." "We have a school crest?" I whispered to Julia. "Of course we do." "Starting next semester," said Mr. Roberts, "which you all know begins in 3 weeks, we will become the first public high school in our city to wear uniforms." This time, there was an instant reaction, and the booing became a larger part of the mix. Mr. Roberts had to raise his voice to silence the crowd. "Now, are there any questions?" he asked. It seemed like he looked directly at me. No, he was looking at Julia. Julia jumped to her feet. Why wasn't the student council consulted about this decision, she demanded. There are many things which are beyond the scope of student council, but in this case, things just moved so quickly that there wasn't time. How fair is it that students are expected to wear a uniform when some of your staff dress like they're going to the beach, she asked. We all knew which teacher she was talking about, although recently they had been dressing more formally. You make a valid point, Mr. Roberts agreed. As we all know, some members of my staff have, in the past, dressed in a highly unprofessional manner. This has been corrected. I looked up on the stage. The head of the English department was wearing a tie. The only way he would have worn a tie before was wrapped around his neck like a headband. The new uniforms will be worn by all members of this school, including teachers and administration, as if they were informed in a staff meeting prior to our assembly. There was no reaction from the teachers on stage. Some of them had to be unhappy, but they sat there, stone still. There are many reasons this decision was made, and I hope to have the opportunity to discuss this with you over the course of the next few weeks. He paused. It's now the end of the day. You are dismissed. On cue, the bell sounded. Kids jumped to their feet and started out of the auditorium. Julia rushed up to the stage, and I trailed behind. I didn't want to miss what she was going to say. Mr. Roberts, she yelled. We have to talk, right now. He looked down at her. My office, 2 minutes. She nodded in agreement. And Ian, you come too, he said. Chapter 3. We settled into our chairs, Julia, myself, and Oswald, who was still wearing the new school uniform. On the short trip from the auditorium, we'd been bombarded by people complaining about the uniforms. Most of the students thought they were unfair and asked Julia what she was going to do. There were threats that kids weren't going to take this lying down. I knew Julia was about ready to burst. This was looking like the opportunity to take a stand against the principal that she'd been waiting for. Mr. Roberts closed the door to his office, sealing us in. He took a seat behind his desk. It was enormous. There were lots of papers on it, but it was very organized. Each pile of paper was neatly stacked and labeled. I assume that you are not in favor of the uniforms, he said. I'm completely opposed to them, Julia thundered. It's not fair. Not fair, Mr. Roberts questioned. The concept of fairness involves conformity to standards in which all people are treated equally. How is this not fair? Julia opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked helpless. I needed to do something. Maybe she chose the wrong word, I said. Since everybody is going to wear the uniforms, including the teachers and myself, Mr. Roberts added. Yeah, including all the staff makes it fair, but maybe it isn't the right thing to do, I said. And how do you think it's wrong, Ian? I really, don't know if it is wrong, I sputtered. You think this is a good idea? Julia asked angrily as she turned to face me. I didn't say that either, I said. So you do think this is a mistake? Mr. Roberts asked. I felt myself stuck between a rock and a hard place. No, that would have been better. I only came because you asked me to come. I didn't really... Julia was growing angrier by the second. But I'm glad I'm here now. I want to hear both sides of this argument. I really do. I really didn't. Good. An open mind is a good thing, said Mr. Roberts. Let me start by explaining the reasoning behind this decision. The concept of uniforms is based on the sense of equality. You all know how students use clothing to define status. Rich kids wear the most expensive designer clothes, and those who can't afford them struggle to keep up, I added. Exactly, Mr. Roberts said. I worked at not looking at Julia because I knew I wouldn't like the look she'd give me. She had in the past accused me of being the principal's pet. I was nobody's pet, including hers. Uniforms cost money, Julia said. What about those who can't afford them? They're not free. They cost less money than regular clothing, Mr. Roberts answered, and we have worked out an arrangement where all students will receive uniforms at a reduced price. For those who still cannot afford them, they are free. So much for that argument. If you think about it logically, between gym clothes with the school name on them, team uniforms, and the dress code we already have, this isn't a giant leap, Mr. Roberts added. Julia looked like she wanted to say something, but she didn't know what to say. There is also the safety factor, Mr. Roberts continued. The uniforms will allow us to quickly identify who belongs here and who doesn't. That makes it safer for all the students. You do want the students to be safe, don't you, Julia? Yes, of course. Then you see why the uniforms are, in fact, not only fair, but also a good idea. Julia nodded her head ever so slightly in agreement. I had to hand it to him. Mr. Roberts had all the answers, and Julia was completely unprepared. Is that why he'd called us down right away? Why he'd sprung it on everybody like this? Was this a sneak attack? A Marine would know all about sneak attacks. Oswald, you've been uncharacteristically quiet, Mr. Roberts said. It might be the uniform. Maybe it's having a positive effect on me already, like medication to control my normal hyperactivity. I can only dream, Mr. Roberts said. He and Oswald reached across the table and gave each other a low 5. I meant, what did you think about the uniform? He asked. It's a little stiff, but I guess it'll soften up as I wear it. The tie feels a little bit like a noose. Stand up, Mr. Roberts said. Oswald got to his feet. Mr. Roberts stood and leaned across the desk to adjust Oswald's necktie. Is that better? Much, Oswald said. I think, all in all, this won't be the worst thing in the world, at least for me. He turned to face me. But I'm a little worried about Ian here. Me? Yeah, on me, this really works. But I don't know if you have the basic cool to pull it off, said Oswald. On you, it might look a little geeky, that's all. I couldn't help but laugh. But don't worry, Ian. You just keep hanging around with me, and you'll benefit from the cool halo that surrounds me, Oswald said, gesturing to himself. If that's why people hang out with you, I said, then you'd be a pretty lonely guy, standing alone in your polyester jacket and polyester blend, Oswald said, cutting me off. See here. He opened the jacket up to reveal a label. It's 85% polyester and 15% cotton, so like 15% of it is 100% natural. You'll have to excuse me now, Mr. Roberts said. I have a few more hours of work to do before the day is done, and I'm sure the three of you are anxious to start your weekend. We thanked him and left his office. I closed the door behind me. Thanks a lot, Julia said. Sure, no problem, Oswald said. I was being sarcastic, she said. Really? Oswald replied, leaving no doubt that he was being sarcastic. Could you at least take off that stupid uniform, she said. No can do. I know for a fact it's against the present dress code to walk around in my boxers, although I could pull off that look too. Just shut up and go get changed back into your regular clothes, I said. We'll wait for you at the back door.